The possibility that the U.S. may establish a military presence in Peru has also triggered the anger of Bolivia's President Evo Morales. He says the presence of foreign military in a Latin American country is of regional concern. But Peru's president disagrees, and as Chile Tele 13 reports, he's asking the Bolivian leader to butt out.
Evo Morales está en el ojo del huracán, tras el impasse diplomático que vive por estos días con el presidente peruano Alan García, quien hoy hasta lo mandó a guardar silencio, tras asegurar que Estados Unidos posee una base militar en territorio peruano.
Que venga ese señor Morales dentro del Perú y que me diga dónde está la base, pero lo mejor que podría hacer es no meterse en política peruana, ni estar dividiendo a los peruanos o estar queriendo enfrentar peruanos con peruanos. Ya suficiente parece haber hecho en Bolivia como para venir a meterse aquí.
Lamento mucho que presidentes pueden mandar a callar a un presidente. Ahora, el tema de las bases militares ya no es un problema interno, es un problema de la región, no es un problema de un país.
The government of Ecuador, a big ally of Venezuela's Hugo Chavez, is plagued by accusations that some of its officials are CIA operatives. This has led Ecuador's president to fire his own defense minister, accused of being on the CIA's payroll. That story from Spain's Televisión Española.
Rafael Correa ha elegido a este hombre como nuevo titular de defensa. Se trata de Javier Ponce, un periodista que hasta ahora trabajaba como su secretario personal. Estos días Correa está sumido en un enfrentamiento con el ejército, al que acusa de deslealtad por haber informado a Colombia antes que a él mismo de que Ecuador mantenía contactos con las FARC. Dice que han actuado controlados por Estados Unidos.
Latin America is moving toward political and economic integration, similar to that of the European Union. At a recent meeting in Brazil, 12 Latin American countries signed a treaty to create UNASUR, the Union of South American Countries. One of the initiatives of UNASUR is the creation of a single market. And to counter U.S. military influence in the region, Venezuela and Brazil also proposed a South American Defense Council. It would draft defense policy and serve as a mechanism for regional security. We have this report from Bolivia's ATV Noticias.
La primera resolución del flamante organismo fue la designación de un grupo de trabajo que presente una propuesta para la creación de un Consejo de Defensa Regional promovido por el presidente brasilero Luis Ignacio Lula da Silva.
Determiné a mi ministro de Defensa que realizara consultas con todos los países de Sudamérica sobre la constitución de un Consejo Sudamericano de Defensa.
El organismo pretende impulsar la integración de la región a pesar de los fuertes conflictos diplomáticos que existen entre países vecinos y a los que el presidente colombiano Álvaro Uribe ha hecho eco pidiendo a los miembros de UNASUR que clasifiquen como terroristas a todos los grupos violentos que atenten contra la democracia en el continente.
In our studios to talk about U.S. security and what part Latin America plays in it, we have Ted Lewis from Global Exchange. And from Washington, D.C., we're joined by Jeff Thale from the Washington Office on Latin America. First of all, welcome both to Latin Pulse, and thank you for being here today.
Thank you very much.
Mr. Lewis, why was there so much opposition in Mexico to Plan Merida?
I think that many Mexicans see that in order to have something like Plan Merida come in, you really have to practice amnesia, because we know that in the 1990s there was clear evidence, and the New York Times did Pulitzer Prize-winning series on the issue of corruption all the way to the top levels of the Mexican military. There has not been any thoroughgoing reform. The elections of 2000 did bring in a different party to the country, but there has not been any kind of reform within the military that would give the kind of confidence that you'd need to think that this institution had really changed.
But doesn't that support then the idea of actually bringing money and trying to train these troops, trying to change them, trying to teach them something on how they can better fight the drug trafficking?
Well, if we thought that was really going to be the practice, that would be, you know, it sounds good, right? It sounds good what you're saying, But I think the reason that I'm concerned, and I think that so many Mexicans are concerned, is that there's not any transparency about this. We don't know exactly how that training is going to take place. And at the end of the day, we know that this is an institution that is very hermetic, and that, you know, for all the $1.4 billion of aid that's going in, that still remains a relatively small part of the Mexican military budget. And this is not the kind of practices that we think should go on. If you really want to deal honestly with the narco problem, you've got to look at U.S. consumption. You've got to look at consumption in Mexico as well, which is a growing issue. And within Plan Mexico, there's not a cent that goes for rehabilitation of addicts.
Mr. Stale, what about Mr. Calderon's efforts along the U.S.-Mexico border to try and curtail some of the drug trafficking? The violence in the area has increased tremendously. How is he doing?
I agree with Ted. There are pretty serious problems with the Mexican armed forces. I think we ought to see a much more serious emphasis on strengthening the institutions of the Mexican justice system, the police, the attorney general, the prison system, as a way of helping Mexico deal with that part of the problem.
But that hasn't been the push from the United States. The push has been to actually continue training these forces, train the police forces within the country in order for them to be able to fight the problem. However, that is still being seen as controversial.
Right. The fundamental emphasis in Plan Merida, at least on the Mexican side, and in the first year, is aid to the Mexican military. And there is some aid for institution building, judicial reform, human rights training, police reform, but it's less than 20% of the package. And I think our view is that a better package would put a lot more money into that in the long term and a lot less money into the Mexican military, and complement that with what we need to do here in the United States.
Mr. Lewis, what do you think about the training that the United States is conducting of the police forces in Latin America, the push that there is to help them be able to fight their own internal problems?
It's important to recognize that the United States has not really ever engaged in a serious evaluation of our policies of support for dictatorships throughout these decades. It's as if nobody remembers. We act as though these things had never happened, and people in Latin America who were affected by these policies, and friends of mine who, you know, died going to their jobs by, you know, attacked by thugs who were sponsored by the United States. These are not so easily forgotten. So there's a suspicion, and in addition to that, you have a changing strategic situation in Latin America, partly driven by the fact that people don't trust the motives of the United States in the region. So as countries are able to sort of escape the U.S. orbit, you've seen a very strong counterpole to the United States growing in Latin America. And so it would appear that the United States is trying to hold on to some of the few countries that it has left that have institutions right through the political and military institutions that are completely aligned with U.S. policy. So they're trying to strengthen those areas to maintain a handful of allies. But the truth is that the larger strategic picture in Latin America is one of growing independence for those countries. And that's what the United States is really up against. So I don't really believe that the motives behind U.S. policy are as clean and as clear as they're presented.